All right, guys, I'm Corey Frederick here on the Tyrant Network Podcast show. And I'm off the mat today with a special guest, Steve Bastianelli. Steve, welcome, or really that's the first time I've ever called you Steve, at least to your face. But Mr. B, welcome to the show. We appreciate you taking time. I'm going to go through just a quick little bio for Coach B here, and then really just want to turn it into a conversation with everybody. But for those of you that aren't familiar with Steve Bastianelli, he's born and raised in Delaware, went to Sussex Central High School. And from a wrestling perspective, he was 84-0 undefeated, and that was 10th through 12th grade. Back then, for whatever reason, 9th grade there wasn't part of high school. Therefore, he was a 3-time state champ, a 3-time conference champ. He was junior national champ. I guess that was AAU back then, I think. Coming through high school, he ended up being a first-team high school All-American. He was on the USA Wrestle and Dream Team. In high school in 1976, he took 4th place in the Greco trials, the Olympic trials for Greco, and took silver in nationals as well in Greco. Kind of jumping into college a little bit, and we'll circle back on these things. Mr. B wrestled for Lehigh University, where he was a 4-year starter. He was a 4-time place finisher, placing in the top 3 every year in the EIAAs, and a 1-time champ is there. 4-time NCAA qualifier. Senior year, you were a captain. 1979, your team, Lehigh, placed 3rd in nationals, and then you graduated with academic honors. Your career, you ended up graduating from Lehigh. You moved back to Delaware, but instead of going down south, you went to a St. Mark's private school up in northern Delaware. You were an American history teacher. You were a freshman soccer coach. In regards to wrestling, you coached St. Mark's for 23 years. You had 10 team champions. You had 8 runner-ups as a team. Your overall dual meet record was 201, 79, and 2. You had 58 champs in individual states, 131 place finishers, 3 4-time champs, 2 3-time champs, and 7 2-time champs. In 1998, fun fact there, you had 9 finalists, 8 champs. That's a record. Over the years, you had 5 nationally ranked teams. Coming out of high school into college, you had a couple All-Americans that went on. Both of them actually wrestled at Clarion. Sheldon Thomas was Delaware's only national champ, and he was a 3-time All-American. And then John Testa, your heavyweight, ended up being an All-American his senior year. And after about 23 years, you stepped down. You were an assistant coach for a couple years, and then post St. Mark's, you decided to become an athletic director at Newark High School and Sussex Academy. Then kind of rounding out your bio, you are in the Hall of Fame for the Delaware Sports Hall of Fame, which I think you're one of only maybe 2 or less than a handful of wrestling-related people that are in the Delaware Sports Hall of Fame. You're in the Delaware Wrestling Hall of Fame. You're back in your hometown. You're in the Sussex Central High School Hall of Fame. And then coming up this February, you were getting inducted into the St. Mark's Hall of Fame. So, and I know the list is much longer than that. That's an abbreviated bio for you, but that's quite an impressive resume, whether it was as an athlete or as a coach. And I guess if I just jumped in and started asking some questions or thinking on behalf of the audience, Mr. B, and for those you don't know, I wrestled for Mr. B, so I'm always going to call him Mr. B. I'm never going to call him Steve or anything else. So when and why did you start wrestling?
Well, I was in 3rd grade, and my dad was the coach at what was then, I guess, would that have been? No, I guess it would have been Sussex Central then, because Georgetown and Millsboro combined. And I was allowed to be a manager. So I had a buddy and come to practice, and then we would wrestle and do whatever everybody else did. And then at the meets, do whatever. One of my favorites was way back before it was Sussex Central, Georgetown was wrestling Millsboro. And my brother Mark ate too much, and he puked all over the place. And I cleaned that up. Probably wouldn't do that as a manager today, maybe, but that's how I got started. And then went on through. In those days, there was no summer wrestling or anything like that. And we at the Indian River School District, Sussex Central, had a junior high, which was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and a senior high, which was 10 through 12. And they were different buildings. One was in Millsboro, one was in Georgetown. You couldn't wrestle or compete athletically in the school that you did not attend. So for that reason, I couldn't wrestle high school till 10th grade.
Was there other
And
high schools in our state though that were 9th through 12th, and it was just yours, or was it the entire state?
no, there was a lot. There were a lot of 9 through 12s, but then there were also, smaller schools that, as long as they were on one building, like Tower Hill or something like that, even smaller schools like Laurel, Milford, then they could wrestle in eighth grade. So my older brother Mark, actually wrestled varsity for 5 years, and he was a 5-time Henlopen Conference champion.
Yeah, I was
So
always wondering why that happened. And nowadays, though, I think Milford High School is even their 9th grade is over in their middle school, I believe. You would know better than
actually,
me after being an AD, but I thought their 9th grade was over in their middle school,
well,
and they're
I
not
don't
under
know.
the.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how they set that up, but it's something about an academy. But anyway, they can use eighth graders now.
Yeah.
So they're a fairly large school, but they can use eighth graders. Typically,
Milford can,
Milford can, yes.
even though they're
Typically,
public school. I thought that was strictly for private schools.
right? No, no. Laurel, Seaford, Delmar, a lot of those smaller schools. I mean, they probably couldn't have a team really in a lot of cases, and definitely not a JV if they didn't weren't able to use the younger kids. So
So,
South Academy could also.
so your entire wrestling career in high school, though, what did you never do any off-season wrestling at all?
I started when I believe it was 10th grade, after my ninth grade year. And then I wrestled in a couple, and then increased that, as the years went on, and of course, as it became more popular. But there wasn't, especially in Lower Delaware. I mean, when I started, you pretty much had to travel 2 hours to any tournament you were going to go to. Now, travel was a little slower then. So, we were in our wagons, but no, just kidding. We, to get to Newark, or warming up their state, New York, took upstate Delaware, it took 2 hours. To go over to Washington took 2 hours, that sort of thing. So, wrestled in different tournaments there, and then it gradually evolved into more organized type stuff where you were qualifying from one level to the next for the Junior Olympics and things like that.
Now, your brother Mark, he's older than you, right?
Yes, he's 4 years older.
So somehow, some way, the school shifted though, where physically you weren't in the building as a 9th grader, but he had not only got his freshman year, but he got his 8th grade year. But from your perspective, especially being a 3-timer undefeated, like, did that ever bother you that you didn't have a chance to wrestle high school your freshman year?
Yeah, I mean, it did, and and being as we were, so close, and my dad was the coach, I used to work out with the high school team quite a bit, and I could beat the guy who would have been my weight, who ended up second in the state that year. But so that's kind of irritating. But other than that, it's just, that's what it was. And
Yeah.
they would go back and forth, saying that, okay, maybe we're going to let the kids from the same school wrestle in the ninth grade, and then it never happened. But you still hear that kind of talk sometimes, like that Newark High School could use their middle school kids, but of course, a number of their middle school kids don't come to Newark High School. So it would be a problem.
Yeah. So then we fast forward a little bit. Why did you end up, I know you went to Lehigh. What made you, or what was your top schools, or why did you choose to go to Lehigh?
Well, I'm mainly because I was academically driven, and Lehigh was a real good school in terms of academics, much better than a lot. And my dad did go there. My grandmother lived on actually 5th Street, which I lived very close to that, only a lot further across town. And it always had a great program at that time. It probably was the best team in the East. Penn State was good, but they weren't like they are today. And so there was a lot of advantages going there. I could go visit my grandmother when she was in a nursing home by then, things like that. Plus, you don't really understand that environment until you're in it. That they are really wrestling crazy there. I mean, it just the one time after Easterns, I believe it was actually in Philly at Palestra, and one of my roommates wrestled 142, and he'd taken a hard knock and had a little bit of a concussion. So when he came back, he had a test. So he said, well, maybe I'll just see if the professor will come over here and ask me questions. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. And got home from my class that day, and there he is sitting in our living room with the professor who's asking him questions. So, I mean, it really was. We wrestled in Grace Hall, which wasn't a huge building, but they packed it every time, and it was a pretty neat place to go.
So I didn't know that your dad went there, and I didn't know that your grandma lived up there. So I just thought your family was all from downstate in Delaware. So did your dad move from Lehigh Valley down to Sussex County?
Right. He has a really interesting story in that, he went to Lehigh, and that was, the war was just beginning, World War II. And so he actually left and went into the military. He was in an engineering unit, and then he was over in Europe. And then when he came back, then he finished his career at Lehigh, graduating in 1949. He said it was a real advantage to him because when he initially went in, he just wasn't one of the more mature guys. He was young for his age in that time period, and so you come back and you've been fighting in a war for 3-4 years. You're going to be a little bit of a different person. And then he finished up his wrestling. His senior year was his best. He probably should have definitely placed in Easterns because he beat most all the guys that. And it was just, one of those things where he lost a close match, and that was that. But he tells some really cool stories about Grace Hall and his matches there and the different guys on their team, things like that. It's pretty nice.
Do you stay connected with any of the Lehigh alums or try to get back to any of their matches?
When I go back to some, not a whole lot necessarily. You definitely end up being closer to your high school teammates and classmates and things than you do college anyhow. But I lived off campus all 4 years. I was honestly mainly there to wrestle. I wrestle and do my work. It was a tough, it's a tough school. I'd thought about majoring in a science, and then looking at their math, I'm thinking there's no way, because I hated math anyhow, and there's just no way that I was going to be able to do that crap. So,
Did you know going in you wanted to be a history teacher?
Not a history teacher. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I hadn't really even thought about it. To me, teaching was teaching. I guess I don't think I ever really saw myself as a phys ed teacher, but because that's what my dad was. But just the same, that was my plan, because I wanted to coach. I wanted to be a coach, and that pretty much at that time, the best way to do that was to be a teacher.
Did you play any other sports growing up?
Okay, so we have a big family. There are 7 kids, and so 4 of us in 4 years. I was the 4th of that. And when you have that many, it was really hard. So we weren't allowed to do other sports until when I was in my last year of what would have been Little League, which I think was 6th grade. I begged enough to where my mom and dad said I could play Little League baseball. But the agreement I had to make was that if I had to ride my bike to anything, because they weren't committing to taking me. So that was a 5-mile ride. But the day that I was supposed to start, dad had a lifting program after school. And so we're lifting, and one of the wrestlers, the big ones, did a sort of a foot sweep on me. And I went up in the air, came down and broke my wrist. So I missed half the season, but then I played baseball there. I played baseball in the junior high 7th grade. I made the team, but just, to watch on the bench pretty much. And then I did play 1 year of soccer in 10th grade because I couldn't find anybody to work out with me in the fall. So I figured, I'll play soccer. And but
That's
then
what I was
the next
wondering about
fall
soccer.
I'm sorry?
That's what I was wondering. So you only played 1 year of soccer ever in your life?
1 year of my life, yes.
So when you started coaching soccer, was it more because your kids were soccer players, or did you or is it just for some extra income, or why did you decide to coach soccer?
Well, when I got to St. Mark's, they were talking about starting a freshman team. They had a soccer team, and at the time, especially, it seemed like anything that you could agree to that they wanted was going to make it better for you getting the job. And it was a little bit extra money. It wasn't very much, but I guess every little bit counts. But that's how I started coaching. And and then once my kids got into it, then I was really, really involved. So it's,
Were some of your siblings living upstate at that point, or was it just that St. Mark's had a job available and you jumped on it? Because you guys are pretty
um,
family oriented.
yeah, I kind of Mark, my oldest brother was living up here, and it was a little different downstate. I think downstate now is not a heck of a whole lot different than upstate was. But like when we were talking about colleges down there, like they would immediately talk about, first off going to a Southern school. There wasn't much of a concern even really to encourage college, and I didn't want my kids growing up in that where I saw it, being up here, especially by the University of Delaware, more of an environment where they would, see that as their path. Now, I mean, in my family, we all saw that as our path, so it wasn't like it had to be, but it was just a little different, and looking for that different kind of environment. So I actually interviewed in Northern Delaware. I interviewed in Baltimore and in New Jersey at Blair Academy.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. 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 I decided against that just because it's a live-in, and you as an early faculty member would be living in a dorm house essentially. And I was just getting married. It's not really what I wanted to do at the time. And then they were good then. They weren't as good as they were going to get shortly after that.
So when you started St. Mark's, when did Jeff Buxton start Blair? Do you remember?
He would have been there. Well, Bob Latessa took the job that next year, and then I think Jeff Buxton joined Bob another year after that. So it was only several years in, but we were the three of us got to be really close, especially from competing and working together at camps and things like that.
I always wondered how you established a relationship with Coach Buxton. So you had known him prior to coaching and through training or competing and camps and all that?
No, he wrestled for Rhode Island, and I believe it was my sophomore year. Sophomore, junior. No, it would have been junior because Daryl Burley was a freshman. He wrestled Burley, and Burley just threw him all over the place. Daryl Burley was a two-time national champion. So, I mean, but yeah, and he wasn't that good of a wrestler necessarily, but it turned out, obviously he was quite a coach.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking back, let's say as an athlete at any level, what are some of the most memorable times you can think of, or some of the highlights of your career that really stand out to you that you're most proud of, or was just a good time?
Yeah, I mean, you can go down a lot of different paths, in a question like that. Some of the things that I guess that most proud of and was definitely my junior year in college when we placed third in the NCAAs. So, that would be equivalent today to, whatever team in the NCAA football thing coming up is going to lose their first game, but would have been the third place team, that you're better than all the other teams in the country, essentially. There were 5 of us on the team that scored points. That was my best year. I was 1 point from placing.
Your junior year was your best year?
My junior year. So that was, it was pretty neat, you got called up as the third place team, got the huge plaque and things like that. It's, whenever you watch it on TV, you're only going to see the champion because obviously they're not going to do much more than that, but the ceremony is a lot more. So that was, that was kind of neat to do that. I think definitely when I was a high school senior, I decided that I wasn't going to wrestle any more high school tournaments in the summer, that I was only going to wrestle open competitions. So, I went in the national AAUs, which was the big tournament then. The National United States Wrestling Federation was another one. And, in that one, I wrestled a guy from, I think it was South Korea. And the Koreans are all around the match screaming at you. So that's, that was kind of interesting. Another one was where I wrestled in an Olympic qualifier, and the guy who was second at 105, the weight class below, 4 years before, he had lost in a really long wrestle off. I'm wrestling him. He's an older guy, and it's the first time I ever had little kids on the side of the mat yelling, "Kill him, Daddy, kill him!" So that was kind of interesting. Um, and then, and then back to high school, there was quite a rivalry back then. Wrestling was really big downstate. I don't know that people would necessarily recognize it, but the matches between Sussex Central and Smyrna were just amazing. I mean, the one year, the line into the gym was probably at least 50 to 75 yards long, for people to get in. They're not big gyms, obviously, but they were packed and the
Yeah.
people were going crazy. My senior year, the match happened to be at Smyrna, and it was a wild match. We beat them. It was a really cool kind of thing. Then went to our bus with an escort because they'd already knocked out some of the windows. Smyrna was a little different then than it is now. A little rougher at times.
So a point back to when you were in college, and it was 1 point match, but back then they only placed top 6 for All American, right? So had it been top 8, you would have been an All American.
No, that was they had started top 8 by then. So
Okay.
that was what they call the blood round. And I lost to the kid 2-1 or 1-0. I can't remember, 1-0, maybe something like that.
Do you think that, so like, you go to Lehigh Valley or Texas football or Ohio wrestling, but like, and even downstate in Delaware, but do you think that like the crosstown rivals and, the old matches, or even football games, do you think that that's hurt by, all these private schools up here? Because everybody just goes, you can have 12 different schools in one neighborhood versus everybody going to the same school, like, I miss those days, like the old school William Penn St. Mark's wrestling match when I was around, but there's still some of that downstate rivalry, but up here, like you just don't get that. You don't have that. Everybody doesn't go to the football game on Friday nights here, or if they are, they're going to 20 different schools.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is different down there. There's no question. I was, my first year as an athletic director was at Sussex Central. And one of the things that really kind of surprised me, because you know how it's always a big deal, them selling tickets for graduation if people have come in. Well, there had to be at least 100 people sitting on the football field outside the gates because they didn't have tickets, in their lounge chairs, just watching graduation, just like that was the thing to do. You probably wouldn't see that very many places. But yeah, I mean, and just so you know, the rivalries were, they were pretty intense. And the further you go back, I think the more they were localized, because when it was Georgetown and then newly Sussex Central, all the kids in that area went to that school. So like if you went over to Seaford to the movies, because Georgetown didn't have any movie theater, wearing your Sussex Central jacket, you could get jumped. Because they didn't like you being in their town with your jacket on, that sort of thing. But it was different, and but the rivalries are kind of neat when you have them that way. Mm-hmm.
So when you first started coaching, I'll tell you from my experience, when I first started coaching, I think a lot of what I did was because of, how or what I learned from you and our practice room and things like that. But when you first started coaching, what was your style? Was it all like based off what you learned from your dad? Was some of it from Lehigh? Like, how do you think you became the coach that you were, or how did you evolve as a coach?
Well, it was a combination of a lot of things. I mean, it was definitely a lot from my dad, and I think he was one of the few coaches that had actually wrestled, and I'm say it this way, but kind of knew what he was doing. And I followed a lot of the things that he did, but there was always an emphasis on learning and getting better. So I back in those days they had books, and I would actually, when I was learning freestyle and Greco-Roman, go through the pages and try the different techniques. A guy named Carl Adams, who was a great wrestler at Iowa State, put out a number of books, and so there were some really neat things like that. Then at Lehigh, I learned a lot as well. It was a little bit different, but I mean, you could tell that Dad had wrestled before, because we wrestled like a college program in that, and very much the way I coached in high school. You did a lot of teaching, you did a lot of drilling, and you did a lot of live wrestling. You did virtually no other things. They're running miles and miles, and especially taking up practice time for that wasn't happening. You didn't have enough time. But I guess on the flip side too, you learned what not to do too, from things that went on as well. And so I feel like it was just kind of a thing that you had to keep at, and and it's a constantly evolving thing. You can't, if you think you're going to coach just like you did years ago, or even like you did last year to some degree, you're probably in a lot of trouble. I'll never forget, after my first year at St. Mark's, I was talking to my college coach after the season, and I said, Coach, I can't do this. I can't teach basic skills all my life. And then the next year, the kids are in the room and they're parroting the things that I had said the year before. And it's just kind of amazing to me that they remembered it. And then, so obviously then you can continue. And so, kind of developed an idea that I referred to as a snow 'em technique, and that you just threw everything you could at them because the kids were so different, and it varied as to what they would prefer to do. And then I always said that I feel like I learned more through a season than I taught. I mean, that became more and more true as the years went on, because kids would come up with technique. I mean, I don't know who started doing the reinforced bar. We had a lot of success with it through the years. Spencer Lee is kicking ass with it now. But we had a kid named Brian Burbage, who was my first state champion, who used it all the time.
So you didn't originally teach that to your guys? You learned it from one of them?
Well, we just kind of came into it. I don't know. I mean, I always taught arm bars and things like that, but it was just the rules had changed a little bit, so they were counting back points a little bit quicker. You know what I mean? So any way you could like delay them on their back, essentially, you could pick up back points. So we called it a cheat two back then. And then, from there, kids saw the success he was having. Then they wanted to do it. A few years later, we had some kids that were good with legs naturally. And so, I mean, I didn't use legs very much, but I began teaching them all over the place, and we developed all kinds of different things from them, and a lot from the kids. And again, it depended on the build, because I think you were one of them that you would throw the legs and then cradle over the back. I could never do that. I could never get my hands to meet, but there, that was a technique you could teach, and then they would do it. And when you have that attitude of learning, the kids would always like, the one kid from Milford was doing a cradle, and then he was stepping over the head the opposite way. And we're like, what the hell? So the guys are watching, they get on the mat and figured it out, and then someone started using it. But to me, that's the great thing about wrestling, is that it is so evolving like that. And, it's always going to be different.
Do you think, like, on the cardio side, was it more like, hey guys, we only have so much time for me to teach wrestling, that that's something you can do on your own? Or was it, you just thought that, or maybe it's a combination of both, you just thought that you can get all the cardio that you need through drilling wrestling and going live, that you don't need to do other things like just running stairs or wind sprints or whatever?
Right. I mean, that's kind of what I thought. And I had never really, we ran a little bit at Lehigh, not like a lot of schools do, but when we had double sessions, like over Thanksgiving or Christmas, we would, run and drill in the morning, and then drill and wrestle in the afternoon, that sort of thing. But for the most part, and especially in high school, you just couldn't get the kids together. You had them for that 2 hours, and that was it. And my dad, and always preached, I mean, in a way, I guess maybe there's no other way to do it. I don't know. I never coached football, but just watching football practice, what you're watching is a lot of standing around. And maybe that's what it has to be. I don't know. But in wrestling, if we were standing around, if we weren't doing something, then we were doing something wrong, that we should be active and doing things. And if you did that you would get out of it what you needed. And if you remember back to the week before, like the states and things, the practices really weren't that long. Because you already had the conditioning, so you were just kind of toning things, making sure you didn't get hurt like that. So
my memory's not always the best. Back then, we even started tapering down a little bit towards the end of the season.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was actually, I had planned, that was a plan, that we would go lighter and lighter as the time went on.
Yeah. So as a coach, and I think sometimes, like, I'm overly critical of myself as a parent, as a coach, whatever it may be. I think anytime you're looking back on things, or maybe when things didn't turn out exactly how you wanted them, but what are there anything that you would have done differently, or maybe a couple of main things, but is there anything you would have done differently over the years, or wish you would have done, or now you know what you know and you have all this experience that you would have implemented some different things or changed?
Yeah, I mean that's always going to be true. And some of it's things you would never do, and others are, I mean, one of the first things that I would think that is our first year, we were having trouble filling, I believe it was 140. And so we were like beating the halls and going after kids. And what high school kids a lot of time will do, like in a situation where you change a coach, a kid's wrestled for 2 years, but then he doesn't come out. And so I found out who wrestled the year before, of course, didn't come out, and I'm going after him. And usually they quit. They didn't usually stay in there. And Bill and I have had conversations about that. Bill Valencia, my assistant, who was with me all the way through, we would never do that again. I mean, our main goal really was to make it an attractive sport. So they wanted to try it and they wanted to do it. But, you had to do what you had to do at times. When Sheldon Thomas was a sophomore, we didn't have a heavyweight. And so, a lot of the guys knew our soccer goalie at the time, Travis Siriaco, and they talked him into coming out, and he ended up being second and third in the state. So, it's just a variety of things. I think the way we presented things changed. Initially, I would show everything, but it got to the point by the end of my career where there were kids that could do certain techniques a lot better than I could. So they showed it, you know what I mean? So you weren't just teaching, but you were also teaching them to teach, to be coaches. And a number of them have gone on to do that.
Yeah, you've had out of St. Mark's, or at least my generation. I mean, we've had a ton of guys that came out of there to be coaches, and I remember back whether it was working a summer camp with you or just as you got older and we were a little bit more experienced, that you had us teach some technique more. And then what I learned is the more you teach, the better you are at yourself at some of those things, and you pay attention to some of the details. And even as a coach, I've had a lot of guys coach or teach or do whatever. I think that like you mentioned about Jeff Buxton, and I don't know what level he was as a wrestler. And, I certainly didn't, I don't have the most accomplishments out there, but as a coach, in the very beginning, I coached just like probably you were and how our program was. But then over the years, whether it was with Tyrant or Team Delaware or whatever it was, I surrounded myself with so many people and all the traveling I did across the country that I really just developed, I became a student of the sport myself and learned so much as a coach. And it's almost like, well, damn, if I could have been that passionate or that into it, or focused when I was an athlete, where could have I been, but back then you're balancing partying and school and girls and all that stuff. And, like, I think as a coach too, like I look at, or even as a parent, that you see the potential in people. And that's what's tough, is that they don't always give the same level of effort or commitment to reaching their potential in anything, no matter if it's sports or not. And I think that's the hardest thing, because you want them to reach their potential, but kids are kids.
Mm-hmm. And that's, you try to give them the opportunity. But I mean, and what you're saying is, is absolutely true. I mean, the thing, like the two guys that coach Blair, Bob Latessa and Jeff Buxton, that when the teams, really grew to be tremendous, they, neither one were very good wrestlers necessarily. They wrestled in college and they were okay. But had never even qualified for nationals or anything like that. But they did. I mean, they had the freedom in a way to do that. They were in a highly competitive wrestling area. I mean, those guys were welcome anytime. Come to the Lehigh Wrestling Room and just show up and watch, work out, whatever you want to do. And we didn't have that really. I mean, I guess you could have gone and watched the University of Delaware wrestle, but I did, and my brothers wrestled there, and I did some, and it was hard to take. It was hard to watch. So.
Now, I mean, from the best of my memory, and then overall in your career, that most of your coaching was done in season at school, right? You didn't do a ton of out of season coaching, did you?
I taught clinics in the summer. That was what my summer job was. So, 6+ weeks at different clinics doing different things. And especially when, as I got older, I often was the one organizing the technique sessions. So what ends up happening when you do that is, the director says, we want to cover this, this, and this during the session. Well, whatever the other coaches didn't want to do, that's what I taught, because that's what had to happen. But I mean, as far as out, there were different wrestlers through the years that wanted to do more outside. And so, a young man named John McCoggan, who was a two-time state champ. And I think one of the biggest reasons why our program turned when it did, not if it did, but when it did. He really wanted to do it. So we used to wrestle quite a bit. We were, fairly close in size. And, for him training in the summer, of course, you're not allowed to do that until they're a senior. So, you were limited in that regard.
So how do you think your I say work, but let's say, coaching, but your work-life balance was, or balancing to having two kids, your wife, and then, our schedule, like, even if, let's say, I was thinking more of the club atmosphere where, you didn't coach, let's say club, we went to a lot of open mats, but you still had your camps and clinics that you did. But, in season, we were still going to Virginia and New Jersey, and it was around holidays and all that kind of stuff. But, how were you able to balance that? Or was it Mrs. B, your wife, just extremely supportive and your kids understood?
That was tough. I mean, and I think a lot of it, even, now looking back, because you don't realize you're so enmeshed in the whole thing. I think her parents were huge because they were here with the kids an awful lot. And, she's a nurse, which is a great profession for someone who, who's married to a teacher, that because their hours, they can do so many different types of things. But, you really did miss a lot of time. I mean, pretty much from the first tournament, which would have been the beginning of December, until the end of February, pretty much the weekends were gone. I mean, the only day I was home was Sunday, and we're in bed a lot of that, if depending on how things went. I mean, it was pretty tiring driving back from Virginia duels and getting home at like 3 a.m, that sort of thing. But I wouldn't have it other way. I mean, we were kind of forced into scheduling that way. But now, I'm glad we did. I mean, I think it offered a lot of great things. But I think it really kind of hit me, the impact of that, when, my son was never really that interested in wrestling. And then he decided to wrestle. And I was, soccer is his big sport. And I was surprised when he did in school. And the one time when I asked him, he said, well, I don't get to see you very much. And as when you're wrestling, you would, because he was with us on all those weekends. So, that's a little tough, but, I spent a lot of time with them otherwise, because that's what I was coaching a lot on the off season, was soccer, because I was working out with them.
Yeah. So the schedule that we had, I consider it to be a lot more traveling than the normal local schools. Was that something that just evolved over time, or like how or why did you start, traveling as much as we did as a program? And did you ever meet any resistance from St. Mark's? Were they supportive of you wanting to go to Virginia, New Jersey, and all over the place, as opposed to just wrestling all the in-state guys like most other schools did? Or how did that all come about?
Well, the reality was, back then there was a real conflict between the public schools and the Catholic private schools. And so Bill Valencia, my assistant, his mom was actually one that led a lawsuit against the public districts, and they were forced to play the private schools in a number of, like each sport, they had a number of meets or whatever that they had to participate in. As we got better, then no one wanted to wrestle us. And the way that ruling was, I think it was only 3 matches. They public schools had to wrestle us. And so it was just like we needed matches, and people didn't want to wrestle us. So, we began to look for tournaments. And also, in those days, it was a little different. You were allowed a certain number of events, they called it. And a dual meet was an event, and a tournament was an event. But if we're going to travel several hours to a tournament, or several hours period, we want to wrestle more than one time. So we were looking for tournaments in a lot of cases. And, I think it worked out. And, just to know that it wasn't just Delaware schools that didn't want to wrestle us. I mean, we went to a tournament called the Gilman Duels for years and years. And then they finally pulled me aside and said, look, we're not inviting you back because your guys are just too good. And that also happened at a tournament in New Jersey, which is kind of interesting because, New Jersey thinks very highly of their wrestling. But I think
What tournament was that?
It was Hunterdon Central then, but
Yeah.
it was top of the East tournament for years and years. And then it moved to Hunterdon Central. But that was right around the time of that team that had the 8 state champions. And, the guy came over and I started to tell him, look, we're losing quite a few people this year. And then I thought, you know what? No, I don't want to come back here and our kids do well. And then I'm feeling sorry for them. I mean, they asked us not to come. So we found another tournament.
So that top of the East tournament became the Hunterdon Classic, the Holiday Classic.
Central thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm still pissed off about that. I don't know if you remember. And there's plenty of times where I had other things, but I remember just cutting so much weight over Christmas. And it was my senior year, and the senior year was different for me, and I was beating the kid and I was on top, and all he did is just reach back and hook my head, almost like a reverse cradle. And I remember just like fucking falling over, and I got pinned, and I was so pissed off myself, and you couldn't even wrestle back to get third there. So I only got fifth. But I remember going into like the bathroom or a back hallway, and I was just so pissed off myself, but I had no energy. I didn't cut weight the right way. And, I'm sitting there eating cantaloupe or next to nothing over dinner, and I just had no energy whatsoever. And I think back on it now, and I don't know that we had, the resources that we do nowadays with strength and conditioning and nutrition plans and all that. But I almost wish that I just would have went up in weight and got bigger and stronger and ate all the time and never cut a pound. And I remember my senior year, you came up to me for whatever reason. I don't know that I ever got an explanation, but you asked me if I wanted to go 171, I believe, and I was 152. And I was like, well, why would I want to do that? I'll win it at 52, but I was still cutting a shit ton of weight.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's largely it. I mean, to me, if your main focus is on cutting weight, you're doing the wrong thing. I mean, you really want it to be wrestling. Part of the problem when you're a part of a good team, though, is if you see a place where you can be on the varsity team, you're going to go for it. And that sometimes led people to cut a lot of weight. I mean, my nephew Jason, who eventually took over the program when he was in 10th grade, cutting to 119, but he desperately wanted to be a part of the team. And that's the only place he had a shot at getting into the lineup. So he, it was probably a little too much for him, but he did it. And, that was kind of common throughout that people would do that. But there certainly are a number of times when moving up is an advantage to you, because you always had, you had such a large frame that, once you fill out into it, and you can't, most cases, the higher you got and the lower you got, the competition wasn't as good, or at least there wasn't as much of it that was so good.
Yeah.
There in the middle that you had a lot. So.
Well, somehow, I mean, because, you guys were always loaded. And, for me, there was no internet back then, right? So I was at Tower Hill for 2 years. I just remember going to the state tournament for whatever reason and seeing a bunch of St. Mark's guys win it. Matter of fact, that year it was Kevin Butts-Winkus that won his first state title. And then I came in his senior year as a freshman. But I was fortunate where I was lucky at least half the year before I lost a wrestle off to Adam Peatlock. But, there was nobody at 152. I only weighed like 148. And I just fit in, luckily for me. But then the rest of my career, for whatever reason, I just stayed 152. But, I kind of jokingly say this, like a Justin Jackson, a Kyle Talley, all those guys, they were so good and so strong. I mean, sometimes I just say, damn, I'm lucky that they didn't want to wrestle me off. They probably just gave me the respect because I was their elder. But, I was fortunate enough to be varsity there forever. But, yeah, and I just hated school, and I started my family young. So I know I thought about college, but I just never really thought about it and just was ready to kind of move on with life. But ultimately, you and I were talking before we started recording is, no matter where you finished or, it was the journey to kind of get there. And I think, really I am who I am today because of everything we did through wrestling. And there's some things, like as a kid, and I tell these stories like when I used to coach, but, I don't know if you were strict all the time with everybody. I don't know if you had your favorites or not, but I know that there were some things that I did that just naturally brought it upon myself. But, my sophomore year when I got pulled off the team right before states, I was furious, and I was thinking to myself, you know what, I'm going to transfer. I live by Hodson, and I had friends at William Penn, and I never even told you probably any of this stuff, but I was just thinking, I was just so pissed off that you did it to me. But really, you didn't do it to me. You just enforced it, like you taught me lessons. And, now, like I always tell people, like, hey, somebody cuts you off, like you could go road rage them, or somebody does something, you can go hurt somebody, or you can make a bad decision. But no, like I think back to, the lessons that I learned at the time. It was so big, and you took so much away from us, is what we felt like. But really, that was such a small little blip on the radar for life lessons, that down the road we became the people that we were because of the life lessons that we learned early on. So, while it sucked not to be able to wrestle in the state championship that year when I was a top 3 guy or could have won it, I think that's what helped me along the way as an adult and as a parent and as a coach and all those things. So, it stunk then, but yeah, I think, you did all the right things. So I don't know what it was like for you. Like sometimes, like, when you discipline your kids, you feel bad about it, but it's got to be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, really that to me brings up probably what I consider the most important rule in coaching or teaching. And that is that you have to treat everyone fairly. And that's easy to say, but the reality is, if you're going to treat everyone fairly, you have to treat them different because they're all different. And that's like, how many times have you seen the coach who says, nope, that's the rule, you got to do it. I mean, like, I feel like we worked with a ton of different situations through the years. And when you do that, treat people differently, you open yourself up to criticism. Because this parent says you let this kid did that, but you didn't let my kid do that, and so on. And, as a coach, you have to have the confidence to believe that you're doing the right thing for that kid. And if you're doing the right thing, it may or may not be popular. It may not be popular with them or with the other people, but you're doing the best you can. And no, I didn't always feel like it worked out. Yeah. I mean, there were certainly times when I wish I had done things differently, pulled back a little bit, whatever. But that's just the way it was. I mean, you couldn't go back. All you could do is learn from it. And I feel like I did that. And that, one of the hardest things I think for me to adjust to and even to explain to people is that there are some people that you can scream at and they barely hear you. There are other people that you say a negative word to and you crush them, and you got to kind of pick that up and know how to go with them, because they are that different, and your objective is for them to develop the best they can. So you can't treat them all the same. You just can't do it. And,
do you ever think you were too strict?
I think at times, but overall, no. I didn't seem. I mean, the attitude or remembrance of me seems to be that I was strict as all get out, but I felt like I was bending and weaving all the time. And it certainly was such a tremendous advantage having an assistant coach like Bill Valencia. I mean, because we went over things so much, talking about them, this, that, and Bill's very soft spoken, but he would always say what he felt, and that really helped. Because you knew you were getting the real deal from him. He wasn't trying to tell you what you wanted to hear, but he was giving his honest opinion, and then we'd work it out from there.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm half joking but half serious. But I still to this day tell people, or like I joke with my wife, or she jokes with me, and I say, "Oh, I'm scared of Mr. B," right? So, and if we were both standing up, people would probably laugh at that, right? But I think you commanded, like you didn't tell people, but the way you conducted yourself, the way you coached, the way you treated people, you just commanded respect. And I think, and then on top of that, though, I think, knowing that I don't think you ever drank, alcohol, you were very straight laced and all those things. So, you weren't the partier, you weren't crazy and all that stuff, but you weren't the bad cop. You were just a straight cop. But so, you commanded a lot of respect, and you had it of us. But I know that Bill Valencia, he was the guy that I always told everything to, right? He was the one I was comfortable in telling all my mistakes or all my bad decisions to, or, if I got in a fight, or, when my wife got pregnant my senior year, and that was really after the state tournament, I think anyway, but, just all those things I told him. And years later, he was a groomsman in my wedding, but then, Mackenzie, my daughter, got married, a month or two ago, and, you and your family were there. So, I think everybody kind of serves their role. And, for me as a coach, there was times where I was a good and a bad cop, but a lot of times I was just the over aggressive bad cop, pushing people as hard as I could. But I had people like Bill Valencia, and for a while I had Bill as part of the club or at Sanford School that could be the guy there, that could be the soft-spoken person and really kind of coddle those kids that needed it and build them back up. But yeah, so let's just say wrestling, nowadays, I don't know how much you watch, but what do you think it's like now compared to then, or how has it evolved, or like, do you watch much college wrestling or high school wrestling anymore?
I watch all the college that I can. I don't see as much high school anymore. But the thing that's interesting about wrestling and at the high school college level doesn't happen as much, but the rules change from time to time. And we went up to watch Iowa and University of Penn wrestle. And I said to my brother, I still don't think that they've really figured out how to use the 3-point takedown yet. You know what I mean? I feel like they're kind of wrestling the way they always did, but strategy is going to change with that. And in international wrestling, which I follow pretty close. I mean, it changes all the time and in pretty drastic ways, which I don't know. I'm not sure that's really a good idea, but it seems like, especially when you're dealing with international, whenever the Americans come to where they can dominate the way it is, well, then it's going to change. And so, when I wrestled, it was a 9-minute match. 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. That's a long match, I can tell you right now. And when the Americans started whipping up in the third period, then all of a sudden it became a 7-minute match, a 5-minute match. Now it's at 6. So, it really does depend. But it's funny because it changes and it sort of revolves too. That things you'll see for a while and then they get really good at countering it. And so then you don't see it, but because now they are not so good at countering it, then it comes back again. So it is a constantly changing thing, which is kind of neat to watch. And, for me personally, I mean, I look at things and go, I wonder now if what I did would work, I mean, against them, I guess being a little arrogant, I think it would. I mean, they do all the funk stuff, but one of my main attacks was to attack a leg and then come up through the middle, what we called a sub. But the way I hit it, I think, was different than a lot of guys. So I don't think there would have been people diving over and grabbing my ankles the way
The funk.
they do today. Yeah.
So, I feel like no matter what rules they have, though, we're always going to adapt, right? We're always going to figure out a way around it. So it's even like when they changed the overtime rule in college a couple of years ago. So then, all right, I got off a bottom, or what was it? I forget what it was, but instead of taking bottom and then giving up more riding time, I'll just go neutral. And then that way I don't have to give up a point. Like, it's just, we're always going to figure it out. I think the biggest thing is, if any of the rules change, they got to change the rules so the common person that's not involved with wrestling can watch, so our spectatorship can increase. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah.
So
and in some ways they have, I mean, it's certainly a lot easier to say now, well, you count twice, it's 2 point, you count 3 times, it's 3 points, count 4, it's 4 point. You know what I mean? Like, back in the day, you had to count twice to get the 2, but then you had to get the 5 counts to get the 3. So it does vary. But I'm curious to see how this is going to evolve through the year. I mean, to me, one of the greatest changes that they made was having the wrestling continue as long as there's some piece of the body, the littlest piece in either guy. I think that's great because there's just, so much with fleeing the mat and things like that, which it's really, you don't see that much anymore because it's not going to work out for you very well.
So this is probably a 2-part question because I know you have grandkids now and it's a little bit different, but what was life like after wrestling? When I say after wrestling, let's say after coaching, like, because I think a lot of times that's our identity, right? So even for me, when I first stopped coaching, it was like, all right, well, what now? So, but what was life like when you transitioned from coaching all those years to just almost being a normal person or having a normal job or not having to coach? And then, even now as a grandfather, but what was life like originally for you? How was that transition?
Well, I mean, it's a change, but I think that it in my case, I mean, I wanted to coach. I didn't want to be what I consider just a sort of a flash, a few years and then done. But at the same time, it was also taxing on you to to go and work the way we did and things like that. So, in switching up, to me, it was more just a change. I mean, the thing that I tried to preach always was, honestly, it didn't matter what you did. It could be wrestling, but it could be anything else. But be the best you could be at it, no matter what. And so to me, that's the transition. And so, I moved from the teaching and coaching to being an athletic director. And then that was my focus there. And then, of course, there was a ton to learn in that regard. But and it was a lot like coaching, only now instead of coaching a bunch of kids to a great degree, I'm coaching a bunch of coaches.
Yeah.
And believe me, that can be more difficult. But and again, what I realized, I think, through it all, and one of the biggest problem with a lot of coaches, because you're not trying to get them to be successful like they want to be, but they don't really know how, is that, remember that this is about the kids. And when you forget that and make it easier for the athletic director, then you're not doing what's right for the kids. And when you're doing what's easier for the coach, you're not doing what's right for the kids. I mean, that's got to be a part of your focus. Not that they get to do anything they want, but I don't know if you remember, like the one year they decided that they were going to not allow you to check your weight at the state tournament after you wrestled the first day. Well, that's absurd. And the guys that made the change, they wrestled, and if they had thought about it for a second, yeah, it was a pain in the ass. The kids messed around in there where the scale was and all that sort of thing. But the reality was it had to be done. And so, when I was on the state committee for a number of years, that's the one thing I always tried to bring to the table when they started trying to make this rule or that rule, that, what impact is it going to have? Would you as a wrestler have been okay with that? Or, should you do it a little differently so that it does? And, a lot of the things as an athletic director that I did as a coach is, and only now you're doing it for all the sports, is to make them want to be a part of it. And so, things like introducing the lineups and, different things like that, that now it's the internet, the website. The one thing I was demanded of them was they had to keep the results up. For the middle school, all I wanted was a score. For the high school, I wanted all the results every single time. You don't put them on there, and you'd be surprised at the amazingly stupid things you'll hear. One of my favorites, and it always seemed to come out of men's lacrosse for some reason. They didn't want to put the numbers, and they didn't want to put the results, because that you were giving the other team a scouting report. I'm like, you're high school, and in this case, you might not even be any good. You know what I mean? Look at a college website. You want the stats in there. You want the thing, because the parents and the kid want to look at it and see their name and see what they did. It makes them want to be involved. You'll fight those battles on through, and sometimes you won, sometimes you didn't, but
Yeah. So looking back on things, whether it's, to an athlete or to more so probably to guys that are into coaching now, but personally, professionally, what advice would you have for somebody, or all the things that you learned, but if there's one or two things you could tell somebody on a personal or professional level now, sharing all your wisdom and experience and things like that, what would it be?
Well, I think, as far as the teaching and coaching, and I did a lot of thinking about this, and I'm looking at a lot of different people and why they were successful and at their different things. And what I truly believe, and this would be for the coaching, the athletic director, teaching, whatever, is that you need to care about the kids that you're working with. And kids aren't stupid. They know when you're faking it. You got to actually care. But if you do, and they believe that you are totally supporting them and trying to help them, it's incredible the things that they will do, that they will to work for, that their goals will be. But I mean, you look at some of the teachers that you hated, and it was hard to look at that teacher and go, now, does that teacher really care about me? And in most cases, your thought would have been, no, they really don't. It's a job, or it's a whatever. But when you cared, you would work. And I think that's something that we need, but it's not easy to do sometimes. Sometimes people are hard to care about, but it's just got to be.
So how many, and I know we didn't talk about your family too much, but you have Tyler, who, you mentioned that he wrestled for a little while, but he was mainly a soccer player, but he took second in the state the one year when he wrestled, and then went on to play at Pittsburgh. You have Megan, that I know originally went to St. Joe's. I think she came back. She played soccer. She was a goalie, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then she came back and went to school locally, and she's now a nurse. And then Mrs. B, your wife, is a nurse, and she's been with you for, forever. But how long have you guys been married?
Well, I shouldn't think. I'm pretty sure it's 44 this year.
So at 44 years, you got to have some advice on at least a marriage tip for us then, right? I mean, Christ almighty, 44 years. That doesn't happen much nowadays. It's hard to get past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that might be find the right woman that can stand you for that long. But now we actually been together for longer than that. I was 14. I always tell her that I can't believe I wasted those first 14 years of my life without her.
Oh.
But you kind of grow together and learn, and it's it's really, you need a special woman.
Yeah.
Some of us need it more than others, Corey.
Well, in wrapping things up, Mr. B, one, I feel privileged to have been a part of your coaching career, and I didn't tell you all the stories. I know I didn't give any effort at all in your history class. So, but, and then really, the support that we've gotten from Mrs. B over the years, on and off the mat. And, and Tyler used to work with my daughter, Mackenzie, in soccer, and Megan, I don't know that well, but, I know she was around. She was much younger when I was around, but got a great family. We appreciate everything you've done. I look forward to, continuing to talk to you about some things, but I appreciate your time today, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks,
Mr. B.
Take care, Corey.